Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writers Need Help. We're super excited to be here. And tonight we're going to be talking about that age-old question, how do you decide what to write next? So that's what we're all about tonight. And we will be answering questions as well. So if anybody has any questions, we're going to kind of start out by talking about, should you try to write to market or should you just follow your passion? But first, let's do some updates. So let's go around and talk about if we have any news or updates or what we've been working on. So I'll send it over to Ginny first.
I don't know that I have anything new this week. This has been kind of a slow week. I've got a couple of panels and things coming up that I'm speaking on, which is new for me. So I'm kind of nervous about that, including one that's going to be in the UK with my UK publisher. And I'm terribly afraid I'm going to slip into my bad British accent. So I'm going to really try not to do that. But that's the main thing kind of on my radar this week.
I was going to ask if that happened already. I was like,
no,
it's a miracle
it's
that I'm not talking in a British accent right now. Like, it's a me. I had to really stop myself because you mentioned
really You're in theater.
I know, that's the problem. Like, I've spent years of my life speaking in a British accent, so not a good one. So.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I'm ready for this event. All right, Scarlett, what about you? You have my friend on your shirt. My dearest friend.
I do.
The Grim Reaper.
See you later.
Nice.
I was telling you guys, I sent ARCs out to my street team, and they are really great and freaking out about it, and probably won't forgive me for a few weeks. But that feels like a huge weight lifted because it's good. Everything is good. And I've started outlining for my vampire novel, which I get to do a lot of world building.
I'm excited for that one.
That's awesome.
I'm going to need an early reader of that.
You and everyone else. But I would gladly share it. So that's been interesting. So today I spent a bunch of time researching the Visigoths because I don't know, I was like drawn to that, and so I started reading up on that. So we'll see. It's been fun.
Awesome, very cool. Alicia, what about you?
I started outlining my draft 2 for this new work in progress that I'm been working on all year.
I want it.
So. Yeah, I'm really excited for this draft. Like, today was a good outlining day. I think I'm not going as in depth as last time. I think I made it way too complicated for draft 1. So
it's okay. We all do that.
I
do that. I don't.
Oh yeah, it depends. It depends on the book. I have been doing this current revision has been a big process for me. So I just finished up like the first sweep through it on Sunday. So that was amazing because I was working all weekend while the maintenance people were here changing out my water heater. I was just right there in the same room, like typing like the whole time. So I actually stayed focused, which was amazing.
Impressive.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And as my dog was in the bedroom trying to kill them at the same time. So it was like,
Hera hates people.
Everything was going on, but I got there. So I'm going to be going back through it, but I have a lot of stuff that I'm working on. And so it's exciting, but I had to spend today just doing all admin catch up. So that was a little bit less exciting, but I'm ready to get back into like writing, like revising and drafting the rest of this week. So cool. Well, let's start in on our topic. So once again, we're going to be talking about that question, like how do you decide what to write or what to write next? Is it a good idea? Not even necessarily a good idea, because I feel like it depends on who you are as a person, whether or not you can successfully write to market. Like there are some people who very successfully can write great books that fit a market perfectly and they can hit that, right? And they love it and they can do it well. But I think it kind of depends on who you are as a person. So our first question is kind of this, like, do you think it's worth it to try to write to market versus writing your passion? And so my response, I guess, would be, Yeah, I think if you can do it well, and if what you love aligns with a specific market. So like if you're indie publishing and you're looking on Amazon and there's this one specific genre that like sells really well, or even maybe it doesn't sell well and there's like room in it, but it's like very clearly defined and you love that and you read tons of it and you think you could write a great book that fits directly in that one genre, go for it, right? But like, I feel like for me, my interests tend to be very niche and eclectic and strange, and I have yet to be really successful at trying to write for market. So I tend to, by default, end up just writing the stories that I am passionate about. Like, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I would love, though, to get more into studying like what are some very clearly defined genres and what would it mean to stay in one genre as opposed to doing a blend of multiple genres, which is what I typically do, and it's just harder to market. So I think looking for that place, I'm currently wanting to look for what do I love that is a clearly defined genre and that I can actively like write something that just fits right in a genre. That's what I'm thinking of right now. But I'm wondering like what you all are thinking. Have you considered or tried kind of writing to market, as they say? I'm going to throw it to Alicia because this was your topic idea and your question. So I'm going to throw it to you first.
Yes. This was my question because I was interested in finding out what the three of you did. Because I have tried to write to market. Once I found it, like the first couple of books I wrote, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that there was market or what it was. And then when I tried to write to market, by the time I figured out what was hot, was not what publishers were buying. And I really love a lot of genres. And also, I think it's just like the creative in me that I'm like, ooh, a thriller? Sure, I'll try it. A murder mystery? Yeah, okay. Sci-fi? Okay. Like, I want to try all of it. So I think you're right, though. Like, if you are trying to write to market, I would want to write something that I want to write. But my other problem is that once I find out that it's a hot commodity, it's like too late. Everyone's buying it right now. I can't write a book in like less than a month. So by the time I've finished that book, probably publishers aren't buying it.
I think the traditional versus indie thing is going to be very important in that type of right to market. Like if you're actually trying to catch a trend, don't bother if you're traditionally publishing because it's not going to come out for 2 years. So, I mean, you know what I mean?
Unless
but I
you're
think,
Jenny, and then your book will be fast tracked.
but even with that fast tracking though, I mean, I'm assuming it took you some amount of time to write it, and then it's still almost a year.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, that's still not that fast, right? So I think there's a difference between chasing trends versus writing in a clearly defined genre, like an evergreen genre that is not a trend, but it's just you're writing a clearly defined thing versus what I will often want to do, which is do a blend of multiple genres together because I think that would be cool and that can be harder to market. But I'll send it over to Ginny because you did kind of have this fast track thing. Were you considering market at all when you wrote this book?
I mean, honestly, yes. I knew that YA thrillers were hot. I had been watching Karen McManus sitting like at the top of the New York Times bestseller list for what seems like all of my adult life.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, the book has been there like, that's an exaggeration, obviously, but it's been there forever, right? Yeah. So I knew that they were hot, and she's not the only one. There are several others that have hit that list and say they're with thrillers. So I knew it was a hot space to be writing in. But having said that, I wouldn't have picked that to do if that wasn't what I wanted to write in the first place. So for me, it was a combination of the fact that that's what I like to read. And those are my favorite kind of stories. And it happened that I knew that was a big selling market right now. So those two things kind of converge. Like, for instance, if I had known that like high fantasy was like at the top of the bestseller list, I would not have tried to write that. I don't read it. I could never write it. Same with sci-fi, you know. So it was both of those things kind of had to align for me to decide to go that way.
I think that makes so much sense. And like you said, it's thrillers, right? Thrillers is something they've been around forever. They will continue to be around.
Right.
It's not like you were like, I'm going to write this very specific type of, you know, reverse harem thriller in a locked room, or, you know, with werewolves. Like, not something like that's so specific like that.
There is kind of a werewolf.
Oh, hey.
I'm throwing that out there.
Yes.
Kind of a werewolf.
I like it. Yeah. So that's very interesting. I think that's more of the tack I would take too. But Scarlett, what would you say? Because you're interesting as someone, I know you like to follow your passions, but you found this area that is very popular though. Like, it happens to be a hot market, but what were you thinking when you wrote the book?
I was just writing what I wanted to write. I didn't think about any kind of trend that was going on, but what I happened to do, I think, is have divine timing, and I started writing. I had a choice. I could either do a sequel to When Stars Come Out, or I could start something new, and I felt really, really, you know, we talk a lot about following my intuition. Alicia and I are big on that, and I was like, you've got to go in this direction, and so I did, and now I, you know, am a best-selling author, so that's great. And now I'm at the point where I can really just write anything I want, and my readers will read it. But also, we kind of came into this space where people really want something called fantasy romance, and publishers aren't really taking that on as much because they think that high fantasy, the kind of fantasy romance, does really well in YA and not necessarily adult. I don't know if they all believe that, but definitely the ones that I have talked to do. But it's in high demand. So I think I just hit the market at the right time. But in no way do I think that I write for, you know, a trend, or write to a trend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but in terms of when people are asking themselves that question, what do I write next? If they're interested in trying to write something to market, or at least marketable, you know, how do you even go about identifying what that means? Like Alicia said in the beginning, you were like, I don't even know exactly what it means to write to market. So how do you identify what is either hot in the market, or what is like to genre, like at least in keeping with a specific genre? So Alicia, I'll send it to you because it's your topic, but what type of research did you do in the beginning to kind of decide what projects you were going to focus on?
Okay, so when I started hearing people talking about writing to market, or not even writing to market, they would say like, keep the market in mind. And so the way I dug into it was I like Googled writing to market, or writing with the market in mind, and I found like podcasts and articles and like blog posts of other authors, published and pre-published authors, kind of discussing what that meant. And from what I found, it meant like knowing what genres were dead. And at the time I was writing young adult, so this was during the time that post-apocalyptic YA, post-apocalyptic was dead. Vampires were dead. Werewolves were dead. Anything paranormal was dead. So I was like, okay, cool. And like nobody has wanted a demon or angel story for like the past 20 years.
I want a demon
after
story.
I wrote one, and I was like,
I want demons.
I love demons.
I can tell you, I can write my memoir. That would be like first, right?
So yeah, reading articles, and then just, I guess for me, it's watching what is saturated, and like listening to whether publishing houses are saying something is not selling. But the more I got into it, and this has happened for like the last 2 years, I feel like publishing says it's dead, but then it's not like actually dead, and like readers really want it, and sometimes publishers are still buying it, like fantasy, like YA fantasy. They said it was dead like a year ago, but what do they keep buying? YA fantasy. So I don't know what it means, and I wanted this question because I need help.
Well, this goes back to the traditional versus the indie space, and I think it's so much less useful to ask the question, what is hot right now, if you're going to try to traditionally publish, unless your goal in this moment is to land an agent, and that's the stage that you're at. And so at that stage, agents are posting their manuscript wish list, and it's useful to, when you're considering who to target, to know that sort of current information. But like we've said, like in terms of what various people in traditional publishing think is hot, first of all, that's a very specific audience. I think the audience that reads certain like genres in traditional publishing is different from the audience that reads like indie published books. A lot of the time there's overlap, but sometimes it's a totally different group of readers. So like, just because traditional publishing isn't buying a certain thing, or they say they're not buying a certain thing at this very moment, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be hot. So you need to ask yourself, first of all, like we are always saying, what are your goals? What is your intention? How are you planning to get this book out there? And that's really going to change everything when it comes to how you look at the market. So I would say, for me, like I kind of mentioned, when I am doing research and asking myself what I want to write next, now, part of that determination for me, as someone currently only traditionally publishing, is to talk to the agent who likes certain things. And for the first person you have to get on board is the agent. The second person you have to get on board is a specific editor, or maybe you're going on broader submission and then, various editors. So in that case, you're going to have to just focus on this small group of people and what you think they're going to like. But for me, it's more about, like I said, just kind of looking at what like very clearly defined genres, and reminding myself that it's going to be easier to sell something if I can stay in a clearly defined genre and write something that works well for a clearly defined audience, as opposed to something that's in between audiences or in between genres. So that's something I'm kind of trying to keep in mind and learn more about, because a lot of the books that I like to read blend all of those things, and that's great, but it's not necessarily going to be the easiest sell. But Jenny, what would you say? Like, do you, in thinking of like, how do you even define like what it means to write to market, or how do you do research about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think your point is a really good one, that by the time you do that, it's probably too late. I'm in a position right now where I didn't have to figure out what I was going to write next, because it's stipulated in my contract, which was really nice in a lot of ways. That it said that book 2 was going to be a thriller with some paranormal or magical elements, which is what book 1 was. So it was kind of nice to have that sort of taken out of the equation and not have to try to figure that out. Of course, that won't be true next time around. So I think, we hear a lot, like at conferences and things, we go to a lot of writers' conferences, and you hear agents and editors talk about what's hot, what's being acquired right now. And I think that that's more useful to you if you've already started to write that, obviously, and you can say, this thing that I'm working on, maybe there's a market for it. But certainly, if you're going to like go home and try to start writing that, you're probably a year away from finishing it and then revising it. And then even if you get it sold right off, it's 2 years, down the line, like you said, and it's all over. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to write, one of the things that I did was spend a lot of time reading, obviously, what's current and what's hot in that genre. I knew I wanted to write YA, so that took a lot of the figuring out of it. And I was starting to see a couple of books that sort of reminded me of what I thought I might want to write. And once I started to see a few of those sort of pop up, I thought, hey, maybe there's something going on here that I can sort of get in on. but yeah, it's a kind of, it's mostly a guessing game.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, so Scarlett, for you, now that you have developed this very rabid fan base, I mean, you kind of have an idea probably of what they want to read, like you're communicating with them on a regular basis. So is that serving as your guide? Like, what if one day you were like, I'm going to write a space opera, you know, like something radically different or whatever? Like, do you think
I do plan to write sci-fi?
I mean, so would you question that, or would you like? I mean, how do you think about it now? Like, is it mostly what you think your current fans are going to want to read?
I think I'll always write with the same elements. So I think I'll always have like the element of romance to my books, and I don't know what makes my readers like what I write, but I mean, the only time I consulted them, and I will do this again, is when I couldn't decide if should I work on Malice or should I go to A Game of Retribution, which is Hades' point of view of ruin. And they did vote, and they voted for Malice. And people will ask now, what made you decide to work on Malice instead of Retribution? And I'm like, you guys did. You might have come after that poll, but it was still the readers, you know. And once Malice is out, I'm going to ask them if they want chaos before gods, or you know, how they want me to continue, because you know, I think that those books, they can come out in whatever order, but I think because of that fan base, it's important to give them that choice. But for my vampire novel, I was kind of worried. I didn't know how they would respond, and but I just knew I needed to write that book because the characters are really, really loud, and when I announced it, they freaked out, and that was really cool. So I think sometimes I write, you know, I haven't really, the only time I've chosen what direction I would go was with Hades and Persephone, but that was only to sort of decide what they wanted to see first. I was still going to write those novels no matter what. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. Yeah, we know, Gabby. You guys don't like the PG elements.
Well, that's an interesting question to me, though, because let me ask you this, and my next question is going to be kind of about changing genres for various reasons. But what if you had an inkling one day that I want to write middle grade fiction, or I want to write something that's going to be radically different, and it doesn't have, you know, the sexy bits or something like that? Do you ever see yourself doing, like, pivoting in that direction? Or do you think, like, Scarlett St. Clair is going to stick with the kind of dark fantasy with, like, heavy romance and that sort of thing? Like,
the only direction I see myself going is doing something that is more of a, like, a novel where I explore kind of my life, what it was like growing up with a mother who is bipolar, and those dynamics of my life. But I think that given the connections I make with my readers, that's something that's important to them as well. And we share a lot of experiences, even in my books, with like the narcissistic mother, right? So I still feel like I could publish that under Scarlett St. Clair, and it would be a book that they would read, but maybe that's because of the connection that they've made with me. So yeah, you know, I wrote YA before this, and it was still kind of dark, kind of creepy, you know, but with less romance. And the reason I switched to writing more romance is because I was reading a lot of romance, and I felt like I can do this, you know. And I'm really glad I did, because I think that's part of, that's just where I feel like I have a lot of talent. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just think that I'll try whatever. I mean, I've always tried whatever. That's why I'm a self-published author. I tried until it worked, you know, and even if Touch of Darkness hadn't worked, I would still be trying something else. So until it worked, that's kind of how I did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so, yeah, so do y'all think there are different reasons why you might want to switch to writing for a different genre or audience? And partly it could be passion. Like, Alicia, you're talking about, like, just wanting to write everything. I'm kind of like that too. Like, I would love to explore everything and just see what it would be like to write different things. But do you think there are reasons to do that, to hop around, or, on the other side, like reasons to stick with one genre and just see where that takes you? Alicia, what have you been thinking in that? Because you're kind of still in that space where you have a lot of room to play around with different genres and audiences.
Yes. At first, when I was querying, so I did YA mostly. The first 6 books I wrote were YA, and that's what I queried. That's what I was signed with. And then I had written a kind of dark YA that was a little depressing. And I was also a little depressed, more than a little.
That's fair.
And I decided after starting to query that, I was like, I just need something fun. And the first thing that popped in my head was this middle grade Frankenstein book about friends who are obsessed with the
It's so cute.
paranormal, and they accidentally make Frankenstein. And I had so much fun with that. And all of my critique partners were like, oh my God, Alicia, you found your voice. Like, you're a middle grade writer. And I was like, oh crap. I haven't written anything else. So when I got the agent call and she was talking about switching that book to middle grade, I was like, oh yeah, I know I can write middle grade. So then after writing that, I was talking to her, and I had come up with that book she signed me with is historical fantasy. That's the genre. And I have a ton of ideas because, history is full of amazing people that I can add magic to. And which is basically what I want to do with everything. So
it's this, but magic.
Exactly.
It's depression, but with magic.
Yeah. So for the one I'm working on now, I thought I should write more upper middle grade because that's what we're on sub with. But she was like, well, that book you mentioned with that queen lady, it sounds really interesting. I was like, that's not middle grade. I can't make that middle grade. I don't even know if I can make that YA. Spoiler alert, I can't. It's definitely adult. But she was totally fine with that. So I think that's why this question really intrigues me, because I always thought that authors publish either traditionally or self-pub in one genre, and you get 3 to 10 in that same genre before, or age category, before you hop over to another one. Really get your fan base, make sure you've got thousands of people that are going to write whatever or read whatever you're going to write. But I'm starting to see more authors jumping around simultaneously, or pubbing a YA one year, middle grade next year, an adult the year after, or all at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, I think there's for sure a benefit that if you can stick with one genre and it does really well. So again, it's traditional versus indie, because with traditional, you don't control the trajectory necessarily. So if you have one book that comes out, because traditional has this launch and debut mentality. So it's all about how does the launch do and how does the initial novel do? And if it does really well, they're going to want to buy more and they're going to want you to continue writing in that. But if it doesn't, it might become harder then for you to sell that thing. So you might not be able to sell another book like that, and you might have to pivot to a different genre or audience. So that's what it is with traditional. And with indie, I think a great thing about indie is that you can put that first book out there and nothing happens, but then you can put a second book and a third book, and there's no launch mentality. You can relaunch these books, or you can do promotions for these books at any time. That book could be 10 years old, and you can treat it like a debut in your promotions, because you control the price and you control what marketing you do. Whereas with traditional publishing, just historically, there's not much money or time put into promoting the backlist stuff. And you don't control the price, so you can't do a promotion and stuff like that. So I think it is a very different thing. If you're with traditional, that's kind of going to determine what you do next to a certain extent. But still, you can still follow your interests, and there's still a benefit to building up a readership in a certain genre or for a certain audience if you are given that opportunity. And I would say that would be a great thing to do, that would be ideal. And I would want to do, if you can do like 4 or 5 books and get those under your belt before pivoting, I think that would be a great strategy. But I also, like, I'm interested in writing for a lot of genres and audiences, so I definitely want to explore all of that. But Jenny, you're kind of like at the beginning right now. So do you have thoughts for, like, have you thought about that? Like, if you might shift at some point.
I could see myself maybe pivoting genres more than audiences. I don't have a middle grade voice in my head. I just don't hear it. I've tried to write it and it's a spectacular failure. I don't know what that kid sounds like. I don't know what they talk about. I can't do it. So I don't ever see myself, I mean, maybe that'll change, but I don't ever see myself really writing middle grade. Maybe adult, although I get kind of frustrated sometimes now with adult books because I'm like, I'm on chapter 6 and I still don't know what this book is about. Is it ever going to start? So that's sort of, seriously, adult books are so slow. So I love YA books. So, that's an audience that I'm pretty dedicated to. I could maybe see myself, switching genres. I could see myself writing contemporary YA, and my stuff is contemporary, but it's contemporary, in a specific genre. If it's thriller, or it's magical or whatever. But I could see myself writing like more straight contemporary. Probably the thing that I would be most likely to pivot and write is something that's totally like outside of everything, and that would be plays. I've written several plays already, and my background, my whole professional and educational background is in theater, so that is something that I could see myself writing, and obviously that is something that would be totally outside the realm of anything, that my agent would rep, or that it's a whole different ball game, but. That would be the most likely possibility. I'm kind of like Alicia. I like to write stories that are like this, but with magic. And mine is like alligators, but with magic. So that's what the first one is, and the second one's like the beach, but with magic. Yeah.
Awesome. I love all of those things. That's great.
Are you excited for this alligator with magic?
I mean, the alligator himself is not exactly magic, but you get the point. You get the point.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a magical alligator in my last middle grade. It's cool. We have.
You do, yeah.
I do, and it's also, yours is in Louisiana, right? So mine's partly set in Louisiana, like that section is. So that's pretty cool. We're overlapping. Awesome. And Scarlett, you kind of already talked about like kind of the elements that you think you're going to retain, and you've experimented with writing for other audiences. Also, do you think you might explore YA again in the future?
Not right. Right now I would say no. I think even when I was writing YA, I think I had an adult voice. I think I was just a teenager trying to thought it would be weird to be a teenager and try to write for adults. But no, I just don't see myself doing that. Even I've had that sci-fi idea in my head for a long time, and it's always felt kind of like the new adult, which is kind of like, is an adult category, but we just specify for ages. And I'd always kind of seen it like that. And so, no, I really don't. I think I will always be an adult author. And I think that my books will always have a heavy romance element and be some kind of fantasy. I've always loved fantasy. I thought I would be strictly a fantasy author for a very long time. And then I thought I would always be a YA fantasy author. And then now I'm not. I'm kind of not. I kind of am like an adult fantasy romance author. And so I'm cool with that. I like where I'm at. I can't imagine writing anything else.
Yeah, that's very cool. You found your readers.
You found it.
Yeah. You found
I wish I could I was thinking the other day about Jenny writing her book, and I wish I could write something like that, but I just don't think that that's my thing. But I love, those kinds of books. And so, but it's just not my wheelhouse. So I try to stay away from that.
I feel the same way. I read yours and I was like, wow, I don't think I could write
Yeah.
this. I love to read this. I don't think I could write this.
Yeah, I think we all have those, you know.
Yeah, I couldn't write middle grade either. I would be like, what's
Yeah.
but I love Skeleton Tree. Like, I loved listening to it. I listened to the audiobook. It's so fun and so meaningful, you know. So I can listen to it or read it, but I can't write it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that, and sometimes you surprise yourself, because I never thought that I would get into middle grade, and it kind of surprised me that those ended up being a stronger voice for me. And there's a cool thing about middle grade, though. I think it doesn't tend to be as strict with genre. Like, if you go into a bookstore, there is no genre demarcation. It's just all the middle grade is all together. And I've heard people say that there's more room for story in middle grade, and I think they mean like there's more room for these oddball stories that don't fit in any genre and that blend a bunch of genres. So that's a perfect place for me, because I love stories that do that, and those tend to be my favorites that I read. And so as I've been considering kind of pivoting into different audiences, that's been an interesting thing to realize, that there tend to be stricter genre definitions when it comes to the older audiences, with YA, but even more so with adult, where if you go into the bookstore, they're very clearly broken down. And there's a different type of book that is shelved in the fantasy section versus the mainstream section. And so when you blur those lines, it gets a little bit complicated for adults. So that's something I've been thinking about. But I did want to remind people we are taking questions. So if anyone has just popped in, we're talking about how to decide what to write next. And we've kind of touched on, like, should you try to write to market? How do you determine what that even means? Or should you just follow your passion? Following on, yes, we love the passion. Following on our discussion about like pivoting genres or trying out new genres, let's talk about pen names, because a lot of people start to think about that if they think of writing for a new audience or in a radically different genre. Has anyone, well, I know some of you have considered it, but has anyone considered it or done it? And when do you think it would be a good time to consider doing a pen name? So Alicia, I want to go to you, because you have this kind of younger middle grade, this more upper middle grade that are like on sub or getting ready to be on sub. And then you have this adult that's kind of on the mature side, right? So have you thought about like using a pen name for one of those?
Yes. This is an ongoing conversation with my agent. And she has been in conversation with her agency, the other agents there, because they have clients that have done this. And so she's just kind of like picking their brain. Right now, we're on like, let's see what sells first, and then we'll discuss. But yeah, we did bring it up last year. And so I just started brainstorming, and I have some really weird names that I could go for. And really,
I want to hear it. Like, I guess you don't want to tell us probably because, you know, but
in case I use it. No, that's fine. There was so at first she was like, well, a lot of authors will use their maiden name. So like Welliver is my married name, but my maiden name is Beers, like alcohol. I was like, I don't know, that's not gonna work for middle grade. No adult or librarian is gonna be like, Beers, okay.
If you're writing like sports fiction or something, I don't know.
Change it to Bears. Close.
Yeah, Bears. Yeah, I tried to like do it backwards, and it was like Shreeb. Yeah. Still kind of like, I got some ideas of names, and then at the same time I'm like, I kind of just want everything under my name, just so that everyone I know knows all the books I published. But yeah, I don't know, I guess that's, yeah, my agent and I have just kind of decided like, let's wait to see what sells first, and like go from that point if we want to, like, I don't know.
Hmm.
It's still just kind of up in the air of like, yeah, have some on the mind and we'll discuss soon and or later.
Right.
Backwards.
Backwards, no.
Cheers.
Oh wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that's smart. It's like where you are right now, just to wait and see seems like a good strategy to have. For me, I'm the same. Like I love some of my favorite authors just use their same name for everything. Like a Neil Gaiman, you know, he's had like Sandman, like the graphic novels, the middle grade, I think like a picture book, and of course the adult novels, and so with everything. But I think for me though, the distinction might be between, and so I haven't used a pen name at this point, but I'm considering because I'm interested in going hybrid. So I've been thinking about stuff like that. And I think for me, the distinction might be my traditionally published books versus future indie published books. And, you know, thinking about like on Amazon, like when it populates like the items like also bought with yours, like I don't want like my traditionally published middle grade books to be mixed with some, you know, like adult novels that I have indie published and they don't go together and, you know, things like that. So trying to keep those two identities separate, I think would be smart. But for me, there's the consideration of time and money. Like I don't want to spend a lot of time developing a social media platform for a pen name and maintaining at the same time as I maintain my other name and the website, and just you're getting into a lot of time investment on that. So I think if you can avoid it, it's great. But there are certain times when you couldn't avoid it. Yeah. So I mean, Jenny, have you had to think about that at all? You're kind of in one lane right now. So
yeah, I mean, it's not, I can't imagine really any circumstance under which I would really feel like I needed to do that. Because like you said, I mean, I'm not going to want to make 2 websites and 2 Twitter accounts and 2 Instagrams. And that just sounds like a nightmare. And also I'm a really bad secret keeper, and it wouldn't be long before I stood up at some conference and was like, it's all me. And then that would be like a waste of time anyway. I mean, the YA that I write tends to be pretty on the, I guess, adult side of YA. It's older YA. It does have a lot of language content. There's violence. There's some pretty strong sexual content. So if you know, it's scary. If I was gonna maybe decide all of a sudden to write picture books, maybe I might, you know, not want to mix those 2 together, but that seems really unlikely. So it's just not something that I, at least right now, see that I would want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Scarlett, what do you want to say?
Scarlett is my pen name. But I picked a pen name for a very specific weird reason that people don't usually pick pen names for. And that was so I could separate this life from my real life. That didn't work. But the idea was that I would be able to distance myself from actually the negative feedback that comes with being an author. And I thought that if I could, you know, give that person sort of I think I kind of used it as a way to become myself, to be more of myself, because I felt like I couldn't be who I am, you know, and write what I wanted to write. And so I thought, but Scarlett can. And so I started to write under the name Scarlett, and slowly I've just become that person over the course of 2 years. But I definitely, everything I've done is sort of an intuitive sort of, you know, I felt guided to do this. And so, yeah, so but I love it. I love having the names, you know, and Scarlett is a name that I was going to be named anyway. My mom had 3 names picked out. They were all from Gone with the Wind. And I'd always wanted to be named Scarlett. And so it's a very easy choice to choose Scarlett. And so, yeah, so now that's what I use. And
so Scarlett and Ashley, and what's the other one?
Tara.
Oh.
So yeah, so I picked it for a very different reason.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, we just have a question that came in. Are there any craft books you've used and would recommend? Great question. For me, the one that I enjoyed the most is On Writing by Stephen King, and it's kind of half memoir and just half very down-to-earth writing advice. So it's not, I mean, that's kind of the thing that Stephen King is known for, I think, is just being very down-to-earth and telling it like it is. And so it's that type of writing book, and I really enjoyed seeing that and seeing his journey. What else? A lot of for middle grade and YA, Magic Words by Cheryl Klein is a book that I enjoyed going through, and it has a lot of useful information, especially on like emotional arc and action arc, and trying to get the character development right. There's also a lot of podcasts and things like that I enjoy. So I like Writing Excuses, hosted by Brandon Sanderson and company, especially if you're interested in writing speculative fiction for adults. It goes way back, and it's been on for like probably 15 plus seasons or something. So you can go online and kind of listen way back to all of those. Yeah, and there are a lot of good podcasts I'm listening to like on the marketing side too. But for craft, I would say those are some go-to resources. Alicia, do you have any craft books that you would recommend?
I do. I have read a lot. There are 14 on my shelf.
She's
at least
counting.
5.
Wow. That was fast counting.
Yeah.
And then at least like 5 on my Kindle. But my favorite one is Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. She like uses the Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting, like, not worksheet, but like they use beats. Anyway, if you're looking for a craft book that like gives you tons of examples and helps you plot out like the beats of a story and tells you kind of like how to flesh out how to get from one beat to another, Save the Cat Writes Novels, great. I think it has 12 beats in it from beginning to end. And Shadow and Bone is one of the examples. So if you haven't watched that, definitely watch it and then read it, and then read Save the Cat.
I was like, or read it first.
It's good too. And then if you want to go more in depth, Anatomy of a Story by John Truby. That one has 22 beats. So it's the same, like those 12 from Save the Cat are in it. And then there's like 10 more, which really helped me with my previous book. That one, like reading that book, like, oh my gosh, my brain like exploded, and that book just like flew out of me. This time around, I'm going back to Save the Cat Writes a Novel for this draft, just because I think I need more exploratory time before I like nail down where those other 10 beats need to go, or when they need to hit.
You're like,
but,
I'm lost.
Yeah. Yeah, those are my 2 favorites.
Cool. Jenny, what about you?
Well, I don't have anything to say now because Alicia took mine, and that's okay. I've got this one like on my desk here. So I've got Anatomy of a Story. I have it right here beside me so that I can grab it when I'm desperate. And that was really helpful because, which is like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times a day. When it comes to me that I don't really know what I'm doing, and I need to look this up again. So that one's really good because it's I don't know, it's more than just plotting. There's a whole bunch of, more in there. There's character and world building and how that all like ties into the plot, which I think is a lot of times I've read a lot of books that are like, this book is about character building, this book is about world building, this book is about plotting. But I think Anatomy of a Story, the story does a really good job of like showing how all of those things are intertwined and dependent on each other.
Cool. Scarlett, what about you?
Well, Anatomy of a Story. So it's got a lot of votes. That was the first book, the first craft book I ever read, that and On Writing. But I really loved the first 50 pages. That was really good. It was really funny because I used that book to write the first 50 pages of When Stars Come Out. Then I got to the end of it and I was like, where am I going? I was like, what do I do now?
The sequel is called The Next 200 Pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny, but it was super helpful. And then if you're interested in writing romance is very formulaic. You can play on that formula, but you really want to follow the structure. And Romancing the Beat was actually a really good book to sort of start just understanding. I mean, I'd read a lot of romances, but just to see how it was laid out was super, super helpful. And then you can play upon that structure. So yeah, I too have. There's a really cool book for world building called The Wonder Book, and I really love that. It's very interactive and colorful, and so I highly recommend that one as well.
Cool. Well, awesome. If anybody has any last minute questions they want to get in, go ahead and get those in for us. But I think this has been a really good conversation. I'm going to go and do some more thinking on this whole genre audience thing, because I think it can be so helpful if you can identify, one genre, one very clear audience, and just kind of write in that area. I think that would be super, super helpful. But does anyone have any final thoughts that they want to leave people with on this question of what to write next? Alicia, you propose it, so have you learned anything, or have you gotten any ideas going forward?
Yeah, I think I was overthinking it. I think the number one thing,
like everything you do in life.
yes. I think the number one thing I'm taking away is like, write what you love. And if you happen to love a lot of things like me, then that's when you mark it into consideration. Like, oh, that paranormal book, maybe I'll wait a few years to write it, because like fantasy seems to be doing well. Like people really like fantasy. I really like fantasy. So maybe I focus on that for now. And then when I get tired of it and it's breaking my brain, then I'll switch over to like paranormal. Yeah. So I think I was just like freaking out that like I'm writing all these different age categories and genres, and that I'm going to have the weirdest time trying to like find an audience for all of them at the same time.
Right. Well, like you said, you're in the perfect time to do that experimentation, and you have the freedom and the time to do so, because once you do sell, it is true that you're going to want at least the next thing, like the follow-up, to be in that same genre and same audience, and like specifically like created as a follow-up to that book, whether or not it's related in any way, and that's going to take up a lot of your time. So you may not have time to be working on, at that point, on this radically different thing. It might be a while before you can do that, So I think it's good to experiment as much as you can right now and just see what lands.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. Jenny, parting words of advice?
No.
Jenny's advice is write a book, get it to sell, and have them tell you what they want next.
I really have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just kind of like figuring all this out as I go. So I mean, I'm letting the cat out of the bag here. I should really be like watching this podcast, like, or this instead of like participating in it, but it's cool to hang out with people that know what they're doing.
It's cool to hear people at different stages, I think,
Yeah.
because you're just slightly farther along right now than Alicia. And so you're in that moment where you're like, you're about to see, like, you know what your second book is going to be.
I'm in that moment where I'm like totally overwhelmed.
Right. You know
And I
that's
feel
gonna
like
be-
I now know that I know less than I did like before I had a book contract. So like that's how it works.
Yes, but you'll be finding out as you go along, and it's good to hear. I think people like to hear though from people in different stages, so they can be like, okay, well, it's like you don't have to know everything immediately, and even people who've been doing it for a long time, you're just constantly learning stuff. So that's good for people to hear.
It's good for me to hear because yes, I'm in that stage where I'm like, I need to know everything right now or else my career is going to fail.
It doesn't matter. You'll just forget it anyway. Like every time my agent calls me, I'm like, do I even know how to speak English? I don't even know what I'm doing.
British
there.
English, maybe.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's great that you can always pivot and reinvent yourself, and there is never a dead end. So even if you find that you're in traditional and you get to that point where the publisher is not super interested in another book like the one you just sold them, that's okay. Then you have the freedom to kind of pivot again and experiment with other things. So it's never, I think the pressure that you feel in the beginning is very strong, no matter what you're doing, because you're just like, this is the, make it or break it moment or whatever. But then as time goes along, you realize there is no one make it or break it moment. The debut is not the make it or break it moment. The whatever book coming out, it's not like you can make additional opportunities for yourself. So I think that's also good for people to think about. Scarlett, parting advice for people.
I really want to yawn. I'm sorry.
Don't do it. You're free to yawn.
I always just write what's loudest, and I've always done that, and I try it, and if it doesn't stick, it doesn't stick. And I think you have to be patient enough with the process maybe to let that happen. But self-publishing is a little different because I think in traditional publishing, those books might not ever see the light of day, but I publish everything I finish. So I don't know. I just think I'm very intuitive. I don't think about what other people are writing. I don't think about what's popular in the moment. I just do it. And thankfully it works for me, but I'm not as intentional, I think, with like the logical side. So
yeah. And it's about what you want to get out of it, because you've had this amazing hit, like by following your passion, but it wasn't your first book that you published, right? Like it took a while. And so everybody's in a different stage. So it's totally fine, like to be doing this as your, we lost
Jenny go.
No.
We lost Jenny. Oh my gosh. Well, we're almost done anyway. But I think it's totally fine to be doing this as a hobby, like be doing this as just an experiment to see what happens and put the books out there. Like all of those are totally valid reasons for doing it, but the considerations are gonna change if you're like, I have to make a living at this and pay the bills. And so that becomes another question. But yeah,
I do all of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can do all of those things at once. If you get to that point, and you've put in the time, and sometimes it takes time to build it up. Cool. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I know I got a lot of ideas. I'm gonna go do some more research into the market. And we'll be back next week. If you have a topic idea that you want us to cover next Monday, then get that in the comments and we will get it on the schedule. So thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Good night, everyone. And we'll say good night to Jenny because she already peaced out. So
Bye, Jenny.
Farewell. Bye.